Okay, I hope everybody's having a great afternoon and had a good lunch and ready to learn a little bit. This is gonna be a lot of fun. My name is Tom Suter. I'm the founder of the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and welcome to our Thursday after lunch IT series. Today, the topic is going to be on cloud migration, an important shift to strengthen federal cloud infrastructure, and definitely a pertinent topic to a lot of government agencies. And I just want to thank all of our attendees for joining, taking time out of your week. Special thanks to, I've got a few here, Leslie Rogers, Brad Schulteis, and the rest of the Rackspace team, great partner of ATARC. And then also to our friends at Carousel that kind of helped us put this together, John Lee, who runs Cloud over there, and Mary Lang. So they kind of helped us set this up. So what to expect today? We're going to have a great intros from our panelists talking about their stories. We're going to pop in a poll question or two and then answer all your questions. So if all the panelists can come on live, I'm going to do a real quick brief introduction and then we'll get to talking. We have with us today Dan Pomeroy. Hi, Dan. He's a Deputy Associate Administrator at GSA. And we also have with us Brian Merrick. Brian, if you could get your video working there, or we're not going to be able to get your video. Can you hear us, Brian?
I can hear you.
Okay, we got Brian. We got this voice. We don't have you on video, but there he is. Wow, that was worth the wait. Is that your backyard?
It sure is.
That's fantastic. Where do you live?
Alexandria.
Alexandria, great. What's your address? No, I'm just kidding.
Never
Looks wonderful out there. Next up, we have Sean Vandriff, Data Center and Cloud Transition Advisor at Department of State on contract. How are you doing today, Sean?
I'm doing well.
Are you in the office?
Not really. That's a virtual background.
You know what? I was on with somebody from GSA earlier. They had the exact same one. Is that San Francisco?
I have no idea.
He said it was San Francisco. I believe him. I couldn't really get a good view. He had me. And we also have with us Katerina Comey. And Katerina is with, where are you, Katerina? I don't have you on my script. You're with Army. You're with POEIS. Yep.
Army headquarters. We're in charge of all their management systems.
Fantastic. Somehow you got cut off on my printer, so on my script. So sorry about that. And then last but not least, we have Brad Schulteis, who runs government global solutions at Rackspace. How are you doing today, Brian?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me here.
Are you in a data center somewhere, or?
In my basement.
Great. Yeah, well, before we get started, I was just kind of thinking about this topic and how important it is. And I remember I had my own company. I serviced the federal government for many years, and I got bought out of that company in 2010. But before that, we were having problems. We had a perpetual race of how many servers are we going to have in our data center. I use the term data center loosely. It was like a large closet, and I counted like 27 servers in our data center. We had an arms race, how much air conditioning we could pump into there. And then my IT guys came to me and said we had to invest $150,000 to upgrade our email server. So I started looking for other options. And this was in 2008. So I went to my partners in the firm. One of them may be on this thing. And I said, they had this thing called cloud computing where you can outsource your IT. Their initial response were to look up in the sky. They thought that there was like some kind of blimp device with a bunch of data, with a bunch of servers. But we eventually migrated email, and we migrated all of our applications. And you can't make this up. I didn't make this up. We actually worked with Rackspace on it. So that was like in 2008. So, and it was a great experience. And what it set us up for, I don't know if anybody remembers Snowmageddon, where we had that massive snow, and we worked remote and had absolutely no interruptions. Did we know it was going to snow? Is that the reason why we migrated to the cloud? And it was a very painful process to migrate.
I think my wife is still on her way home from that commute. That was pretty bad.
That was a brutal one. I think it was like 2009 or so. So I look at pandemic, and what we've seen, and we've been doing these webinars every week since pandemic, you see some trends. The ones that were in the cloud tended to have more scalable type. Things had to change, but they ended up being more scalable. They ended up having better results. So, this cloud transitions is very difficult. It's very painful, but we're going to try to talk about some of the lessons learned and how we can continue to evolve this. And I'm going to start off, we're going to have each of the panelists talk, but maybe I can start off with you, Dan, and talk about a little bit. I mean, you do a lot across government, and you've got a lot of good perspectives with all that experience there at the Office of Government-Wide Policy. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Tom, and it's a pleasure to be here and to be on this panel with so many august experts. I'm very proud of the work that the General Services Administration, the work that we've been able to accomplish during the pandemic. And most of that is due to foresight and investments that were made into cloud almost a decade ago now, 2011, 2012. It was very painful as an organization to get off of an email system that I won't characterize with a brand name, but it was not in the mainstream, and we migrated it into a cloud-based email, and that opened us up to cloud-based collaboration in ways that we had never been able to experience before using that suite. And over time, the culture was able to adapt to using those tools and getting work done. But still, the preponderance of most of our work was done on site in the office. I was one of the last people turning out the lights for my organization when we did go to 100% virtual telework. We were one of the very first agencies in Washington, D.C. to implement that posture. We were only able to do that effectively because of those investments we had made in cloud, just starting with cloud email, as you mentioned, Tom, 8 or 9 years ago, and building off of that and making other investments in other software as a service business tools. And those investments were made over this long period of time. And had we not done that, we would not have had the elasticity to go to 100% virtual. It wasn't perfect. We had to still help our organization know when was a good time to be on VPN and when was a good time to use multi-factor authentication. And that was a growing pain. But as considering that pain of going up that curve versus turning on a dime and taking an on-prem organization into the cloud due to COVID, that was relatively a minor thing to help the organization grow in those ways. So we had a culture of innovation, we had a culture of early adoption, and it paid off for us locally. And a lot of credit goes to Dave Shive, our current CIO, and the CIOs that preceded him, as well as administrators willing to make those investments. And they were tough investments at the time, and we were able to completely transition to 100% virtual as a federal agency in a very short period of time. From the standpoint of the Office of Government-Wide Policy, however, we had other work to do to help other agencies through knowledge sharing. So we quickly put together a documentation for updated best practices. That was ran through our community of practice, and it was done with a lot of agency input, knowing that just GSA talking to other agencies is it's not as useful as talking to large departments and micro agencies simultaneously and getting all of their feedback. And that document, that best practices guide, is being prepared for public dissemination, hopefully this month if everything goes to schedule. But many of the agencies have seen the content because they've directly contributed to that work. So the work is ongoing, and we know that agencies are at different places on the modernization curve. And the beauty of this best practices document is We talk about cloud readiness. How is your organization, where are you at in your readiness? We talk about procurement. We talk about governance, automation, security, and these important elements. And one of the most important elements is change management. Everyone has had to adopt new levels of change because of COVID-19, but nonetheless, the basics of change management are still really important. We cannot be in 100% crisis mode, turning on a dime from March of 2020 to March of 2021. So we are continuing to constantly engage with federal agencies and look for areas in which we can take those best practices and lessons learned and disseminate those internal to the federal government for the purposes of not charging the taxpayer twice for those lessons learned. So I'm proud of the work that we've done. I'm proud of the work that we continue to endeavor in. And with that, I'll hand the invisible microphone back over to you.
Thank you, Dan. That was a great way to kick us off. And next up, maybe I'll switch over to Department of State. Brian, I'm really interested to see what you guys did domestically and overseas. It's a big job, and this is a worldwide pandemic, something we could never have foreseen. But love to hear your comments at Department of State.
Sure. No, thank you. And yeah, as you can imagine, it's a huge challenge. We have 275 posts overseas, 50 within the continental United States. So, we have folks almost everywhere with differing degrees of internet penetration, with their own host of challenges and whatnot. And I think what helped us was we were already going down the path of having, some very strong cloud-based capabilities within the department. But what really changed was, we turned this tragedy into an opportunity in terms of using it as a way to really leverage the technology to change the way we look at decision support, the way we look at data, the way we look at collaboration and interactions. From a basic collaboration standpoint, we already had all of our email in the cloud. We had 85% of the department, 100% telework within the first couple of weeks. It had its glitches and whatnot, but overall highly successful. But I think the more interesting thing was that as the need for decisions to be made at a senior level came to the forefront, they really had to rely on technology to do that. As you can imagine, trying to keep track of an ever-changing global health situation, we need a better way to do that than emails and SharePoint sites. So we leveraged SaaS tools to make enterprise-wide applications to gather this information. We also linked that to our master reference data tables so that we would have consistent data from point of entry. And then we leveraged some of our analytics tools and environments in the cloud so we could crunch that information, provide superior decision support to our senior leaders in a timely way. And by doing that, we were able to roll out 10 applications within 2 weeks, with about a couple more weeks just to get full adoption. And we heavily leveraged our partnerships with our chief data officer organization in the department, so that we could really open up the keys to all those data stores and to get those data owners really aligned to the priorities of the organization. And then, what was really exciting about that was that once senior leaders started seeing the art of the possible and what they could get with data, it really started opening up a whole breadth of different options and ideas about, well, okay, now data really is an asset. Now we can take this large amounts of good data and do something useful with it. And so there are a multitude of upcoming activities, going on in the department that I think are going to help us really leverage that, going forward. And it's definitely changed the awareness of senior leadership on what we can do. And so, we're continuing to add very, very robust features and capabilities to our environment. We're definitely leveraging multi-cloud. We're providing most of the major platforms for our customers through a shared service environment. And it's really a we do, you do model, which allows our customers to really get to work and we take care of the infrastructure stuff, whether it be on a SaaS or an IaaS basis. And, we're brokering to other enablers like, single sign-on tools and other capabilities so people can just get to work as quickly as possible, turning applications for their customers. So I think as we go forward, we're going to see even more of that. And we're starting to see additional leveraging a hybrid cloud as well, but really from a data layer standpoint. So, we're encouraging our users or our business organizations as well to kind of move up the stack into SaaS where possible, leveraging no-code, low-code solutions. But those data stores need to be shared ubiquitously through multiple organizations. So we're trying to keep that, either on-prem or in cheap storage, and then leverage that same data set for multiple purposes. And that's been really useful as we're going forward. Obviously, still policy challenges around that, but I think we're heading in the right direction.
Great. Your dog is yapping and maybe hungry or something. No, I'm just kidding. This is one of the things when you're working at home. This all happens all the time. So no problem at all. Yeah, and Brian, you had a couple initiatives that were very timely. You started going software as a service, low to no code, and you've got a colleague of yours, Jerry Karen, that works with us, that does the telecommunications work and been very active in TIC 3.0. And it looked like it was very timely to start these initiatives early. I think it definitely helped you out. Next up, let's go with Katrina. You've had a lot of the same things of data center consolidation, and I'd love to hear how did you guys handle pandemic and some of the lessons learned there, and where you guys are headed.
Pandemic, the Army and most of my other clients are gone remote, and that's been quite easy thanks to all the email and collaboration that is the agencies have put in. Otherwise the projects that we're working on of migrating these big apps, these big systems to the cloud vendors wouldn't have been able to continue. So that's that work, and that's laid the framework for what we do. Moving these big ERPs, big systems into these cloud vendors. It set the path for those to happen, that the leaders can see the art of the possible, that these big systems can go there, they can operate. And as we, it's not easy to get them there. There's a lot of, organizational change and just cost management and components that have to get worked out. But, the art of the possible of, the big ERPs, and that's usually what we're focusing on at Army, of moving their 5 ERPs up into a cloud, and we won't mention which one. And that, it is working. We get them there, that it's possible, where they're operating, performing well as they get there. The big improvements that we're seeing for the agencies are, automation, the security controls, the access around it, the being able to leverage that data now that it's there and it's in a more open structure. It's kind of opening up these big systems for the analytics or for these PaaS tools to be connected to them, and sharing those data sets, which before had to be copied or provided to somebody else. And now we're able to get to what I love to refer to as the store once, use many concept of having that data set, even though it's in a database, or creating that big data lake, and connecting all the analytics or other tools to it, to have access to the data and use the government's data, since the government's got data, nothing else. They've got lots of data, and they need to be able to use it, leverage it, understand it. And cloud is providing the tools to do that in a much faster manner than building everything on premise and trying to maintain it that way. So that's what we've seen in that. And then also the increased ability to manage the infrastructure costs, and to tie the costs of that business decision. Oh, let me do this to costs, to infrastructure, to the AWS costs. So when they, some project manager, in our case, some guy with a lot of stars on their shoulder makes a decision, 6 months later, you can start showing them what that's costing. And they're really, their eyes open up, and it helps them make better decisions, instead of versus just waving their hands and saying make it happen, doing the Captain Kirk thing. But that's what we're seeing as far as what the cloud is bringing to our capabilities, and being able to continue to do this in a pandemic from our remote offices and backyards and stuff. So.
Fantastic. And we'll get back with some more questions in a little bit. But next up, Sean, I know you were actively working in these migrations, and what has changed with COVID, and where do you see as kind of like, what's the new tempo after all this, kind of like we get through crisis management of this pandemic?
Sure. And just for clarification, I'm with Deloitte Consulting, and I do support Department of State, among other
Okay.
agencies. I do have perspective on and we're doing migrations across multiple of these agencies. But in terms of the pandemic and what we've seen, I think the other panelists here have already mentioned a lot of the things. I'm not going to revisit those, but a lot of the work that's been done over the past few years clearly enabled this, and enabled us to continue working in the current situation. But from a migration perspective, cloud migration perspective, what we're seeing is those agencies that I think are more advanced in there along the curve. It was almost like we didn't skip a beat, right? So we have access VDI as a service into the cloud, and we just started working instead of from the office. We started working from home. The controls were in place to do that and so forth. So our teams just continued to build out environments, continued to work with system owners and migrating those systems. So I think it worked out really well. Now, there was some scaling that had to be done, and I think I think people mentioned glitches and things that had to be worked through. One of those big things was acquisitions, licensing, entitlements to scale quickly. But it was great to see everybody working together to make that happen. I think another thing where there's all kinds of lessons learned here for those agencies or organizations that aren't as far along in the curve. This is just a great learning experience. There's resources that are out there in the government, in the community, in the marketplace that they can take advantage of. One of those that I think is really great is the cloud infrastructure COP run by GSA. I know a lot of us participate in that, in just the information sharing in those meetings is just really amazing. So I think people should take advantage of that. As far as where we can advance, people have already stated there is a ton of data that you now have access to through the cloud providers, how you're consuming it, the cost, your security, the compliance. I think we all just need to get better and put tools in place to actively use that data to manage consumption, security, governance, and so forth. Demand management's another one. It ties right in, I think, to the whole COVID thing and the whole remote access and how we're using systems differently. We're going to be able to harvest a lot of data from that for the future.
Great. And a lot of that work you're talking about is out of Dan's shop over there, Cloud Information Center et al. So you can thank him for that. And his team. He's got a good team over there. Last but certainly not least, Brad, and really excited to hear about your perspectives. The great thing about you guys, you're cross DoD, you're cross civilian, and then you are also got a big commercial practice, and it'd be great to get some of these perspectives that I think our federal audience would like to learn about.
Sure, yeah. Rackspace, maybe not a name that's familiar to a lot of folks in government, but by way of acquisition about 3 years ago, Rackspace Government Solutions was born. And in doing so, we amassed about 21 years of experience providing government-specific managed cloud services, managed security services, managed compliance services. So we haven't yet talked a lot about everyone's favorite glitch, and that's security and compliance, of course. So let's go there. Here at Rackspace, I actually lead a worldwide team of security and compliance subject matter experts. We're focused on delivering security solutions, simplifying compliance with government standards specifically, and then lowering the barriers to entry into the government vertical. What's unique about our approach is that almost all of our FedRAMP managed services is provided business to business to other commercial organizations that they themselves are struggling with this government compliance. So the ability to effectively use SaaS solutions has been mentioned several times here today. And there's a big challenge with the cloud solutions in that there's only 157 FedRAMP authorized SaaS solutions out there today. So the government wants these, they need these solutions to be available in times like this, but many of the desired solutions simply aren't authorized yet. And that's where Rackspace comes in. We act as an enabler. Our customers are able to leverage our FedRAMP managed services in conjunction with their own to streamline their security and their compliance operations. Our goal is to generate efficiencies here and effectively lower the total cost of ownership for these providers, and then lower the cost to the government. And then our ultimate goal is to bring the highly desirable commercial SaaS solutions to the government, but clearly we have a long way to go here. I also think the technology industry as a whole has an important role to play as we're operating in these unprecedented times. For a lot of agencies, this is really uncharted territory, but for technology-centric companies like Rackspace in the private sector, this is kind of status quo. We've been doing remote workforce for a long time. I worked at Rackspace for 5 years now. I've been work from home the entire time. So it was no change for me. Rackspace Technology as a whole made the decision to go 100% remote in the first week of March. And we were able to do that without a ripple. So the technology industry in a lot of cases has really never slowed down. We've probably all actually been going a lot faster because of the pandemic. So we've been able to continue to provide expertise around innovation and cloud, as well as security and just general remote workforce enablement. I think we need to continue to help government do the same.
Thank you for that. And I know I saw a demo from you guys a couple months ago, and for these applications, I mean, you take care of like a lot of the controls, so right out of the box, you don't have to worry about them. And
Exactly.
yeah, I think that's critical, especially these emerging companies that want to get access to the federal government to try to do this all on their own. That's going to take time. And I think you guys definitely provide a useful service there. Thank you for that. Great. Well, we're going to start off with maybe a couple questions. Actually, Alyssa, if we can put the first poll question up. If I don't put it up now, I might forget. We're going to put a real quick poll. Okay. Yeah, where are you in your agency with your cloud infrastructure? Okay, we got some questions there, some answers there. And then also, what are your biggest challenges with implementing cloud infrastructures? I'm really interested to see what this poll comes back. And every once in a while, this poll gets kind of notorious and ends up in a press article. So, okay, we'll give it another 15 seconds. All right, what do we got, Alyssa? Last. Okay. There you go. Dan, what do you think of those numbers? They're starting to sound pretty.
It looks great. The glass is more than half full, which is a good thing. We spent a lot of years doing data center consolidation for a reason. So
yeah,
it's good. It's good.
That's good. I mean, where were we 5 years ago? I don't think we're anywhere close to this.
It's taken a lot of agencies to make a lot of leapfrogging jumps and making tough choices when it comes to data center optimization. That initiative kicked off in 2016, and I think we're just barely really starting to reap the fruits of those seeds that were planted 4 or 5 years ago.
Any other comments on this? This is actually one of the better polls we've done. It seems the results are very interesting.
Yeah,
who came up?
I think there's just some obviously nuance to this, but cloud has made things possible now that we couldn't do 10 years ago. I mean, that's clear. I think we're probably still struggling with cloud enabling a lot of the core mission functionality at the agencies. The ancillary functions, the back office IT, I'm fairly confident that most of those functions have at least been put somewhat into the cloud, if not entirely. But I think the highly sensitive, especially classified workloads are still, we're just not there yet. The commercial cloud services aren't available or sufficient, and remote access is really next to impossible to enable at a classified level. So those are things we're struggling with on an industry and government perspective.
Yep. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think one of the areas that we're struggling with in the federal government is maybe we have solved our internal collaboration problems with cloud, but we have major barriers when it comes to interagency collaboration. And that is another mountain that we need to plan and scale. One of the problems that COVID-19 brought up very quickly was the lack of interoperability between video conferencing solutions. I mean, we're now on Zoom Gov right now. Well, you know, that didn't appear out of thin air prior to COVID-19. That's a post-COVID-19 development. So there's a lot of work that we need to do. And as the federal government becomes more interoperable with itself, and the different communities have to interact more frequently, that especially at the unclassified level, where it's the pain points are most evident. Hopefully the CIO Council and others will be able to make some smart investments into making improvements there. We're optimistic, but it's going to be a long road before agencies can talk to agencies as quickly as they can talk internally.
Yeah, as far, we actually use Zoom for government, but the DoD actually came out with a memo in about record time. As you're smiling over there, Katerina, usually it takes about 18 months to come out with a memo. Remember, we built the Pentagon in World War II in 18 months, but it actually took a couple weeks to crank out a memo. So that's really, you got some big problems when the DoD's working that fast. So good stuff. One of the challenges that the agencies, I think, moving forward, and I think of the folks on this panel, credentialing. We got some issues with credentialing right now because you're used to CAC or PIV. How do we change that? The Social Security Administration, I always use this example, but you can't wheel your 96-year-old grandmother into the Social Security Administration to get services. We're really moving our agencies more toward a digital, transformation. And what are some of the things that these new applications that have stood up? What sticks out with you all that you've had to do that you like almost overnight? SBA, is cranking out more money each day for the PPP loans than they ever gave out in 15 years. It's like just a scale. What is some of been the challenges at your agencies or organizations that you've had to overcome, and what do we see going in the future?
Well, I tell you, for us, Department of State, one of the biggest challenges is, most of our infrastructure was built for years around the physical network. Well, yeah, that kind of doesn't help when we need to talk to the world, because we're the State Department for all the states. So we end up having a real challenge with external user credentialing and access, as you can imagine, not just other agencies, but yep, we need to be able to pass information to other governments, to NGOs, to other business entities, to councils and boards and international organizations. And so our existing infrastructure just completely did not support that. And it created a huge security gap. And so part of what we've done to try to resolve that is we're moving towards a single sign-on solution, which allows us to provide a separate IDP from our core internal user IDP so that we can manage those identities in a safe way. And we're using process really to make sure that, we have a state sponsor that can validate people's need for certain types of information access. But by using that across all of our cloud environments, that's going to make it a lot easier as we try to provision those correct resources, leveraging things like least privilege guidelines and whatnot to that data. Also being able to logically segment and separate those data elements in the cloud has been huge. I mean, we couldn't do that in a non-segmented network environment, just impossible. The risk was too high. So I think that's going to be really exciting in terms of us trying to, provide real-time collaboration, externally as well.
Yeah, we have a identity management group, and we've got some stuff we're cooking up with Debbie Kennedy. I don't know if you know her. We have some ideas there because every agency's had the same challenge. Katerina, is there anything that you want to bring up inside the DoD that you ran into?
Yeah, I think in our sense that the SAML's been very helpful, and it's a good piece for getting the users in our systems. These massive ERPs from authentication, the authorization piece is still very challenging, across multiple systems or systems made up of systems, and these role-based access controls and tracking and getting to. One of our big challenges is moving these 6 ERPs in, and even other agencies moving their ERPs in, is that, who's got what, who's got access to what, and as there's more data, as there's more tools, tracking that identity across and using, SAML's great, but it just says, yes, you can get in. It doesn't say what you can get access to. And having that single control to know that Bob's got access to data A over here and B over here and C, and oh my God, he could put all that together, realizing they have access to it, and then putting in having those business controls or security controls is still a big gap. And our goal is to get all these back-end names synchronized across all these systems to try and get to that. But that is hopefully something comes out so you don't have to get everybody synchronized to that same name or that same token all over the place, and something else evolves. There's still a technology gap or a solution gap in that sense of how to figure that out. But I think it's coming. Maybe some sort of different sort of token-based thing with multiple, so you can check it. But we'll see.
Great.
And then identity is only one piece of the puzzle. Then you got to be worried
Just
about
one.
Bring your own technology, bring your own device. I mean, those devices that we're allowing people to use to get into these systems, we don't really know the security state of that device. We don't know necessarily where they're accessing the data from. So people are moving around. People are, traveling all over the place, potentially overseas, and maybe it's not them. Can we trust the identity itself? So we need to make sure that we're validating multiple pieces of information, really go into that zero trust paradigm, and converging that with the data and the authorization on the back end is still very challenging. And I'm not going to claim to have solved that problem. I know we're working across industry and government to solve that together.
You're crisscrossing all of our working groups. You got zero trust, you got mobile security, you're all over the place. Thank you. Yeah, we're working on these issues in a lot of our working groups. We're starting to get some questions, and they're pretty good. Usage of dedicated government cloud services versus actual public cloud offerings. Are most of the government using the purpose for government clouds, or just attendant in a public cloud, and more like migrating from government clouds to public or vice versa? Yeah, go ahead.
So I think, it depends on what your apps are, little web servers. I don't want to be little, but your information, at DOI.gov or StateDepartment.gov, those are in public clouds. It depends on the data set, depends on what's going on. Generally, all the stuff we're migrating in is in gov clouds. The secure, well, at least the IL4, IL5 stuff. Obviously there's stuff in 6, the secret world, but the gov clouds are for where it's government data. You got to keep that secure. It can't get out. IL2, we see just lots of websites, lots of emails, websites, things that can be or are all over the place anyway. Is the trend that we've been seeing, and running the systems, moving systems up.
Brian, what are you seeing? Because you guys address the citizens as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously we have public outreach activities, and for those, I mean, it's low risk, publicly discoverable data. So as long as it's in a reasonably secure cloud from a defacement standpoint, that's really the concern. But for everything else, what we're relying on is making sure that data is stored in a FedRAMP compliant environment. These days, I mean, it was different 3 years ago. Now we're at the point where most of the major CSPs, there is no control difference between their government and their private sector space, because they can't afford to do it differently. So they're managing it the same way, and as long as they're FedRAMP compliant to the appropriate level, that's what we care about. So whether it be a high load or a moderate load, we're looking for that FedRAMP compliance versus whether or not it's government or not. And frankly, especially around analytics areas and IaaS environments, it's almost a detriment to be in the government space. You end up with less functionality, and then that reduction in functionality drives users to other SaaS subscription tools that aren't FedRAMP compliant at all. And then you end up with a Frankenstein solution of store your data separately from the application layer. And so we're trying to keep everything within certainly a FedRAMP compliant space.
Yeah, it goes back to the data. I mean, I see this every day. We have customers that are saying, well, our government customer doesn't want to use our system, or they do want to use our system, and this is why. But the underlying problem is the government doesn't always have an accurate understanding of what data is in every environment. We need to get to a proper, potentially data tagging or some sort of standard there. It still is not across the board by any means. So when you go to do a FIPS categorization of an information system, you don't really know. You don't know, is this a high impact? Is this a moderate impact? Is this low impact? Therefore, what cloud services can I use? And that's the challenge that I have to deal with my customers and then their end government customers on a daily basis.
Right. We got another question. We got a smart audience out there. They're asking really good ones. I compliment you on your intelligence out there. So this one question is okay, we use cloud for email and shared drive space. More advanced cloud computing and publicly available big data storage and accessibility. That's where they're running into hurdles. What are the panelists' thoughts regarding cloud-based high-performance computing? And I know states and probably the Army have plenty of this.
So
go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay. No,
okay, Carrie, you get to go first, and then we'll go to Brian.
Go ahead.
Well, the cloud computing is there. They've got and growing and scaling every day. So even from their what you can get virtually, and what you can get as bare metal or specialized servers is amazing. The capabilities across the big three. And generally, you get upgrades, you get improvements in a much faster rate than you're ever going to get if you own something and put it in your own closet. So, from that respect, it just is a no-brainer decision. And you can, scale, you can containerize, you can do all these great infrastructure management things to optimize your workload or to create a big giant workload if you need to create a data lake and mine it. So I think the flexibility in the cloud just crushes anything you can, unless you happen to be, some agency with big pockets and giant pockets and can build your own cloud in your own private data center. It just, it's not even a decision factor anymore. Can I get the capacity, capacity? Of course you can. Or you can get better capacity, really.
Brian?
Yeah, I would totally agree with all of that. And, in addition, I have yet to meet a senior leader that can wait 6 weeks to get an answer to an analytics question because we're waiting on a server to come in and be installed. So the reality is in our federated environment, the reason we still have workloads on-prem is because it's already paid for. It's ostensibly free other than our recurring operating cost. So, it's not like we can flex those resources somewhere else. That is the somewhere else. So in terms of performance, you can't equal the cloud and scalability and the flash to bang timeframe. You have to go cloud. Plus the analytics tools that are available in a cloud environment are amazing. So yeah, there's absolutely no activity I'm aware of that's actually happening in an on-prem environment in our organization. It's all the actual analytic activities happening in cloud. There may be data stores they leverage from on-prem, as that's where they happen to live, but the actual analytics engines are there. And what we're seeing is a big move towards AI, bot technology. All those things are going to require access to large amounts of data to train those algorithms. That just is not feasible in an on-prem environment. It's not. You just can't get there. So we don't see that going that way. We're definitely seeing the commercial cloud trend for that.
Great. Anybody else want to comment?
Well, I would agree. I think it's a no-brainer if you're looking for high performance compute, analytics, those types of things. You should be using the cloud. I think several people have already mentioned it here, but it is all about the data, though. So looking at the data that you're going to be running those analytics on. There are tools out there, there are solutions to obfuscate the data. And I think, people or agencies ought to be looking at some of those solutions as well. So that's mine.
Great.
Yeah, I think that the question specifically asked about some of the challenges, and the challenges are there. I mean, if we're honest, the ingress-egress challenge of big data still exists. We still have speed of light limitations, as far as I know. So if you've got a big data set that isn't in the cloud, that might make that analytics capability a little bit less accessible, unless your agency is willing to go wholesale into a specific cloud solution. So that's something to keep in mind. I don't know that we're going to have a kind of open data model across all of government, but I know there are opportunities there to partner with some of the cloud providers to make some of your data sets more open, and then share some of that cost.
Great, great. Another question, how are you leveraging the cloud to modernize your application stack? Are software as a service economics with consumption licensing based models making it easier to test and expand your cloud use? Anybody want to venture into that one?
Yeah, usually, oh, sorry, go ahead, Brian.
No, you go first.
Yeah, Dan, you can go.
No, some of our older applications don't need to be migrated into a cloud environment. Usually the cost benefit is just not there to do it.
Yeah.
So building new and building fresh in SaaS and a FedRAMP SaaS is a great option, one that we recommend for, of course, assuming security and all of those other factors as well. I've been involved in taking lots of old on-prem applications and putting them into software as a solution environments. It's just a better way to go. The laws of economies of scale come into play in SaaS for legacy applications if they're not big ERPs. If there's something that you can wrap your arms around individually, you can individually move them over in sequence. And we've reaped a lot of benefit out of doing that, and we've worked with other agencies that have experienced the same thing.
Brian?
Yeah, so kind of along the cloud smart lines, I mean, really, especially in our federated environment, our business users are focused on prioritizing spend in SaaS for those things that require real-time processing, more collaboration capabilities, or where latency is a real concern. And so they're really prioritizing that as well for the things where they have funding that apply to that. So it's really more the programmatic application functions. Most of our back office type functions, I mean, if it relies on batch processing and you have, all day for that financial file to move from Charleston to Bangkok, not really a huge rush to modernize that. We'll get to it. But the bigger concern for most of bureaus is those activities that directly manage or impact their mission areas, the front office functions, if you will, where that benefit comes into play. And so, we've seen a lot of emphasis moving into SaaS because honestly, even though it briefs well to have a consumption-based model, the government doesn't work that way. And I've talked to industry folks over and over again. I mean, with our appropriation process, most agencies, for the majority of their IT spend, are on 1 year money, not multi-year money, which means we only have that 1 year to obligate. And most of us get the major tranches of our funding maybe twice a year. So we have to get that consumption planning just right, or we're going to have a major problem. Whereas when you're talking about SaaS tools, it's a buy once, build many type of environment for most of those applications. I'm not constrained by my application number or only my user accounts for the most part. Obviously, variations on different license types, but with that, I can forecast that ahead of time, and I can know going into that budget cycle what that user base is going to look like, and therefore what my cost is going to be. I can budget for it, and I can execute that. Consumption is a lot more difficult to manage in a government financial space as we end up with appropriation law complexities and whatnot. So, that's something else that everyone out there really needs to consider. It's not just the technology, it's how you're going to buy it and how you're going to procure it and how you're going to deliver it. Those are all major factors in this dynamic as well. But I do definitely echo the earlier comment about change management. If it's the juice isn't worth the squeeze and you don't absolutely have to move it, don't prioritize it. Get to that once it's too expensive to maintain that old software or that old infrastructure environment.
Brian, do you some of these legacy applications, do you like create an API out of them and use some new GUI out of your software as a service and maybe extend the life out of them? Is that like a viable
Well, that's
strategy?
actually what a lot of our back office business owners are doing. I can speak specifically to HR. That's one of our customers, and they're basically going to, we have very, very old applications. I won't say what platform they're on, but the idea is that they're going to use a SaaS front end for all those applications, and then they're going to basically maintain, the data and some of the back end processing on-prem until they methodically have time to clean up those applications, so that they can improve the experience for the user without jumping right into that massive change management workload on the back end, because they need time to get their staff up to
I think that's one of the best pieces of advice you can give, because it really extends the life of those systems without doing the migration. So that's fantastic. Katrina, did you want to add anything to this?
No, I think it's your points are all straight on. Some systems shouldn't be moved. Some systems should be moved. The advice I'd give to everybody is plan early, replan. Get your contract straight. Don't wait till the last minute. Know when your system's hitting end of life, or you need to do your tech refresh, and plan forward from there, so you're not stuck and I got 6 months and I got to do something quick kind of thing, because you won't. That leads to being on the front of the paper and making the post with another failed cloud kind of story. And a lot of them aren't. It's not, the technology is there. We can usually make the technology work with the proper planning and time and capabilities. So that's usually, it's not a technology fail anymore. It's planning, budget, or schedule type thing that makes these projects fail or makes these things go over budget. And then hopefully Dan at GSA can somehow fix this consumption-based billing piece for us, or at least get Congress to allow us to do that a little bit better. And contracts will match technology and how this works and make things better for everybody.
I think
you got a comment on that.
Oh, sorry, what'd you say, Tom?
No, you got a comment on that.
We've been talking about this a long time. We do have the senior procurement executive of GSA. He's a member of an organization that I'm part of, and we spent a lot of time talking. I think some very significant progress has been made on consumption-based cloud purchasing. I don't have any bullet points cleared to go into any depth on that one, but I want to optimistically say that I hope to see that rectified more sooner than later.
We got one question. Nobody ever has brought this up, but it's interesting. So a new application comes around, somebody in your organization's interested in it, they're a startup, and then the next thing you know, they're not really going to go through the FedRAMP process at this time. First of all, they probably should call Rackspace up. They could probably help them out with that, right? But what happens to technology that you see, and it looks like it could really, really help, but it's not going to be ATO'd. How do you deal with something like that? What if it's a really cool piece of technology that can help the mission? What are options out there?
Shameless plug. Thanks for calling it out. But we are really trying to make this less painful, less timely, less costly journey to get through FedRAMP. So I definitely encourage you to send any of those vendors our way. We're not the only one in this space. There's other folks that are doing what we're doing. So look at the options. Everyone has a lot of kind of misconceptions around how this stuff works. So make sure they understand, what it looks like. And this is on the industry and government side. A lot of the government folks don't really know what the process looks like. So reach out to the FedRAMP PMO. They're happy to help in these conversations. Reach out to some of the industry partners that are out there. And then there's some unique approaches. We've seen it. So look at how you can facilitate a private cloud solution that's a virtual extension of your on-prem environment. That's typically the workaround that we see. And there's lots of different ways you can play with that. You could also, if it's like an analytical system, de-identifying the data was mentioned earlier. If the data is not actually government data, then maybe it's out of scope of FedRAMP. So there are some ways around it.
Are agencies less likely to give exceptions? I remember at the beginning of FedRAMP, hardly anything was FedRAMP, so there was exceptions going around like crazy.
I mean, it's still happening. So now in the NDAA, we do have the language for making FedRAMP more into a law. So that might change that process a little bit. It's kind of TBD at this point, but it's still happening. There are exceptions. And if it's a mission need, mission always trumps IT in the end.
Actually, Congressman Connolly introduced that legislation in an event we did with Karasoff last year.
And I just want to point out that an agency CIO can sponsor a FedRAMP certification. So not all FedRAMP has to go through the job board. There's only so much bandwidth in the universe for those business processes, and those can always be augmented by agencies that are willing to go through those steps to share those ATOs through an agency sponsored.
Yeah, that actually flipped a couple of years ago. So now the majority of ATOs are agency ATOs as opposed to JAB ATOs.
Yeah.
I've noticed our
civilian,
my civilian customers generally are doing their sponsoring things more so than the DoD side. There's an inherent flexibility there that they can take advantage of those a little bit easier than the military space.
So you have all these, these new innovators like DIU and they're bringing all this great technology over. But then the other side of it is they have to go through the lengthy process. That's the irony, right? Is it?
Yeah, there's really a way around that. That's the question was they're not interested in the process. Well, if it's law, it's law. You're gonna go break the law. I don't know about that.
At least the NDA draft language I saw was fairly prescriptive in terms of a company could not pursue an agency ATO unless it had already applied for a JAB. And if that ends up going through, it's definitely going to restrict the flow through agency ATOs to the bottleneck in the JAB process. I mean, I think the real problem is going to be really for those small businesses. Frankly, for most of the things we see, there are other tool solutions out there that can get most of what we need. I mean, there are very few highly unique things, and those that are usually, fairly small. It's difficult to get agency leadership on a practical level mobilized because it can take a year and a half to sponsor a company through that process, and it can cost us on the government side $1 to $2 million in labor just to start. And then at the end of the day, there's no promise that's going to get done. And so in the meantime, that's light years in the SaaS world. We could have moved on to a completely different solution somewhere by then. So the idea that we're going to entrench on that and spend that kind of time because the compliance process is so time consuming with the 3 PAOs, I mean, that's just not realistic unless it's super critical and super unique to the mission. And it doesn't look like another solution's on the horizon. So generally, we try to either see if those companies will provide a hosted solution that we can drop in an IaaS backend and manage it that way, or we try to find other technical approaches to do that, or we ask for an exception. But those are going to get much fewer and farther between because, like I said, at least the draft language I saw is very prescriptive. Thou shalt, use FedRAMP. So I think it'll be less desire to go out in front of that.
I think that's a good point. If they're smaller and more nimble, you can always negotiate to see if they'll put their solution on-prem, and it makes the process maybe a little bit easier.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way around it, but if anybody wants to complain about FedRAMP, just think if every agency did their own thing. That'd be 10 times worse, 100 times worse, right? At least if we're going to that standard. And then in the DoD building on that, where would we be without FedRAMP? You know, we'd have every agency doing their own thing, and it would just make it very difficult for the commercial side to justify even working with the federal government. Any closing thoughts? Of boy, this hour, I said it yesterday in our prep call, it goes by really, really quick. Any closing thoughts? Where are we going to go, and what's 2021 going to look like post-pandemic? What's going to be the new normal? Maybe start off with you, Dan.
This is the wrong time of year to make predictions. Let me just say that. I would say that elasticity and flexibility and change management are going to, no matter what happens, if we focus on our ability to not lock ourselves into too many poor decisions further down the road, if we give ourselves some elastic room to move around, if we understand how to work internally with our customers and our agency partners to improve change management, we're going to be okay. And I feel confident with those base principles, but I certainly don't have a crystal ball.
Yeah. Brian?
Yeah, I think mobility is going to be key. I mean, there's still going to be large parts of the workforce working remotely. And frankly, it's changed the way we think about work. I mean, our whole organization is all about the last 3 feet when it comes to diplomacy. And now people are starting to rethink, you know, which functions really need to be overseas. Where do we really need the right people face to face, and where can we let people work remotely? And I think that's happening, you know, in many places. So I think we're going to see more mobility, a lot more flexibility, and certainly a continued drive towards, you know, leveraging data as an asset, you know, to make it easier to do our jobs faster. I think it's just the speed is going to be an even bigger emphasis because now that people are used to not having to wait, you know, an hour for their system to log on in their old, you know, office, they can just get to work in the cloud. That's an expectation. And the merger of work and life, you know, home and office, people are going to expect enterprise grade, commercial grade stuff at work, you know, just from get-go. So I think it's put a lot of pressure on agencies to adjust their risk tolerance to the types of technologies they'll adopt, and a lot of the legacy stuff just isn't going to make the turn. And you know, I think you're going to see that more and more, a bigger drive towards collaboration, and almost a race to that throughout the agencies.
Katrina, you're on mute. Okay, there you go.
I totally agree. They're you know, getting off of these legacy systems, getting, you know, to apps that are, you know, more phone type things, is going to be a must, especially you know, it goes back to, you know, the pandemic, but also people, you know, there's this government's age group is retiring. You've got to be able to attract new and young people to work in the government, young people to do things, and you can't if you put a green screen in front of them and tell them to get to work. They just won't, they don't know what to do, you know, so I think with all this remote school and kids and everybody starting to use computers even more and more, government modernizing their, you know, all the systems and is going to be even more important to manage costs, you know, get off these old, you know, legacy systems that cost a bunch to do, but then to also be usable by the workforce that's used to a standard, like Brian said. So gives us all work to, you know, our jobs will just be more of that to come. Which is what we're here for.
Sean?
So along those lines, I think we're going to have to continue to advance identity and credential and access management. It's at the core of a lot of this, enabling it. Zero trust, adopting those principles. Again, it's going to enable a lot more of mobile, people being wherever, understanding you know, who's accessing the data, where they're accessing from it, and then allowing access via policy, permissions, and so forth. And then I would say TIC 3.0, which again ties back kind of to those other two things. I think that those things are going to be, they should be top of mind for agencies across the board.
Thank you, Sean. I don't know if you know this, but we have a TIC 3.0 meeting with Jerry. I think Jerry's going to be on it. Jerry Karen, he's running our TIC 3.0 working group, and they've been working in that area. So thank you for that plug. That reminds me that we need to. Last but not least, Brad.
I'll go with a bold prediction. I will say 2021 becomes the year of GOTS. After years of focusing on COTS solutions, we see all these innovation groups starting up in all the agencies with a lot of focus on development. So I think there's going to be a lot of government software. Don't know that's necessarily a bad thing, but there may be some legal challenges to that. We'll see how that shapes up.
Yeah, there seems to be like almost like a holy war between software as a service, and then you've got the development community, all these Kessel Run, a lot of things going on in the Air Force with Nick Shalon, and it's like, what makes sense? How do I modernize a legacy system or have a new system, IT modernization? So sounds like another great topic for another webinar. Thank you all for doing this. This has been really enjoyable to me, and thank you for the audience for taking some time out this afternoon. Are we going to stick the slide up, Alyssa, for next week? But anyway, thank you, Dan, Katerina, Brad, Sean, and Brian. Good stuff.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody have a good week.
Goodbye.